I want to tell you about someone. Maybe someone you recognize, maybe someone you see in the mirror, who's caught in a cycle that feels impossible to break. This is not a story about reckless spending or laziness. It's about a person who is sharp, hardworking, and determined. Someone who watches every dollar, hunts for better opportunities, and still ends up feeling like money slips through their fingers no matter how tightly they try to hold on. I'm talking about a hero who fights an invisible battle, a struggle so subtle that even they don't quite see what's holding them back. I've been there too. You know the feeling when you finally sit down to pay bills or plan your month, your heart sinking just a little because you already suspect the numbers won't add up the way you want. You save diligently, thinking, this time it has to work. But then, out of nowhere, something unplanned happens. A medical bill, a car repair, or that unexpected invitation you couldn't say no to. And suddenly the fragile pile of saved pennies crumbles. It's frustrating. It's exhausting. And after a while, if you're like me, it starts to feel personal, like maybe I'm just not cut out for financial peace. What makes this story complicated is that the hero isn't reckless or careless. They show up on time, put in the hours, and swing every stone looking for those smart moves. Yet, the more effort they pour in, the more the pattern repeats. Income doesn't grow in a way that feels sustainable. Savings remain a distant dream. The future feels uncertain, sometimes even bleak, no matter how many spreadsheets we make or budgets we adjust. I started to wonder if the problem was deeper than the numbers themselves. What if, all along, the real obstacle wasn't just the money management on the surface, but something tangled beneath it, something inside my mind that shaped every choice, every hesitation, every risk avoided? I realized I wasn't alone in this. Many people live with these silent patterns, these invisible forces that guide us without permission or awareness. One day, I caught myself thinking, why does the idea of money create such tension inside me? Why is it that no matter what I do, I never feel truly safe or confident with my finances? I wasn't just battling budgets. I was wrestling with beliefs that had settled into my psyche years before I even understood what money meant. Those beliefs, so faint they sometimes feel like a whisper, influence how I earned, spent, saved, and feared money. I remember overhearing conversations at family gatherings, little remarks here and there about wealth and worth. Phrases like, money doesn't grow on trees, or worse, rich people are selfish, formed the backdrop to my childhood without anyone explicitly teaching me how to handle money well. It's like my mind built invisible fences around what I thought I deserved or could achieve financially, and those fences were never questioned. As a result, even with good opportunities in front of me, I found myself recoiling or retreating, almost sabotaging my own progress without realizing why. So this hero, the very person who works tirelessly and dreams of financial freedom, becomes trapped not by external circumstances alone, but by internal stories and fear-based patterns crafted over years, sometimes decades. Patterns so ingrained they feel like the only reality. It's painful to admit because it means we aren't just fighting outside forces, we're fighting ourselves. That's a lonely place. But it's also a powerful realization because now, the possibility for change doesn't depend solely on luck or external conditions. It depends on understanding what stories live inside us and learning to rewrite them. I invite you to journey with me because this story isn't unique. It's ours, full of struggle and hope, frustration and breakthroughs. Together, we'll explore how these invisible threads have guided our financial lives, how they might be holding us back, and how we might gently begin to unravel them. There's no quick fix or magic formula here, only a path to awareness that opens the door to real transformation. By the end, you might see yourself in that hero, flawed, yet courageous. You will know that the obstacles you face are understandable and, ultimately, surmountable. And maybe, just maybe, you'll feel a quiet stirring of hope that the story of your financial life can change, starting from within. Growing up, I never realized how deeply early experiences shape the way we relate to money. It wasn't until much later that I noticed subtle cues embedded in family conversations and everyday behavior around finances. My parents rarely spoke openly about wealth, but their attitudes formed subtle patterns in my own mind. I remember watching my mother hesitate before buying something she wanted, even when we could afford it. Her nervous glance at the price tag wasn't about stinginess. It was a silent message about caution, scarcity, and restraint. Those moments sank beneath my awareness, gradually constructing an internal blueprint where money equaled stress rather than freedom. At work one afternoon, a colleague shared a story that echoed this dynamic without him knowing. He confessed to turning down a raise because it made him uneasy, fearing he wouldn't deserve it or that others would resent him. As I listened, I saw the reflection of my own hidden struggles, deep-seated beliefs whispering, "I am not enough," or "more money brings more problems." It dawned on me that many struggles with financial growth aren't about self-discipline or smarts, but about an unspoken internal narrative shaping choices invisibly, like a compass programmed to avoid abundance. Beneath the surface lies what psychologists call money scripts, automatic operating instructions about finances formed early on and running in the background of our thoughts. These are often shaped by parental attitudes, cultural messaging, or critical incidents from childhood. One friend told me she grew up hearing money described as the root of all evil. Even though she consciously rejected this phrase, subconsciously, it seeded wariness, making her feel guilty for pursuing wealth. At times, she'd abandon lucrative projects, convinced deep down that her desire for success clashed with her values. These scripts become filters through which we interpret every financial decision, often limiting us without our awareness. I recall a time when an unexpected bonus arrived in my account. Instead of celebrating, I felt a knot tightening inside. The inexplicable urge to use it up fast was overwhelming, as if I had to protect myself from somehow losing that money. It was like my mind instinctively sought to neutralize this unfamiliar abundance. Reflecting later, I understood this was an unconscious defense mechanism, a protective reflex born from experiences where resources felt unpredictable or insufficient. Our brains, wired for survival, sometimes frame securing enough as a battle rather than an opportunity, locking us into scarcity mindsets that undermine our efforts. What's fascinating is how these mental programs shape behavior even when we consciously long for something different. I've watched myself resist investing in my dreams because an inner voice warned me against risk, echoing warnings from years past. This is where cognitive dissonance becomes a battlefield inside me, between the yearning for financial growth and the inherited fears demanding safety and caution. It's like a tug-of-war between two versions of myself, each trying to steer the ship in opposing directions. Conversations with others reveal an astonishing variety of money scripts influencing daily choices. For instance, a friend confided that whenever she contemplates charging what she's worth, anxiety floods her chest. "I feel like an imposter," she said. Here, the internalized script devalues her contributions, making it difficult for her to claim financial recognition, no matter how talented or dedicated she is. It's a shadow that dims her confidence, preventing her from embracing opportunities fully. This scenario taught me that understanding our personal money scripts isn't just about uncovering fears. It's about recognizing how they distort self-perception and directly shape our behaviors. Now, consider the ripple effects. These ingrained scripts influence how much risk we're willing to take or avoid, what opportunities we pursue or reject, and even how we interpret setbacks. When a surprise expense or financial challenge appears, it's not simply an external event. It interacts with those internal beliefs and emotions, intensifying stress or prompting sabotaging responses like procrastination or self-blame. It's like attempting to build a house on a shaky foundation. No matter how well measured the plans, if the base is unstable, the structure wobbles. Realizing this has been eye-opening. It made me question the stories I'd accepted as unchangeable truths, stories passed down silently but powerfully across generations. The weight of inheritance, such as beliefs about money scarcity or unworthiness, no longer feels like a life sentence. Instead, it becomes an invitation to journey inward, uncover the old patterns, and gently loosen their grip. One day, I wrote down the recurring statements echoing in my mind around finances. Words like, "I'll never have enough," or "if I get rich, I'll lose my friends." Writing them felt like shining a flashlight into hidden corners. Seeing those words outside myself triggered a shift. I began to distinguish which parts of the script served me and which created invisible barriers. From there, it became possible to challenge and change those narratives step by step. Perhaps you recognize now that your own relationship with money is entwined with invisible inner stories. Recognizing their origins doesn't erase their power overnight, but it lights the path forward. Decoding your unique mental script gives you a map to understand why you've repeated past financial patterns, why a certain choice feels uncomfortable or even impossible. And once that map is in hand, the possibility to recalibrate and step into a new way of relating to money becomes real, not abstract. In that light, financial frustrations lose some of their mystery and blame. They become signals from within, calls to examine the emotional software running beneath your actions. And by honoring those signals instead of resisting them, we can initiate profound shifts, from survival-driven scarcity to conscious abundance, one thought at a time. It is here, in this delicate interplay between history and choice, that the path to financial transformation truly begins. I remember a moment when everything inside me seemed to resist the idea of growth, even though my head was screaming for change. It was during a meeting with a financial coach, someone I had hired after months of self-doubt and stalled progress. As she outlined a plan for investment and budgeting, a surge of anxiety swept over me, sharp, sudden, almost paralyzing. I found myself questioning everything. Am I truly ready for this? What if I fail and confirm that I don't deserve success? That inner voice, so insistent, wasn't just about fear. It was a complex web woven from countless past experiences, stretching back to the invisible lessons of trust and safety, or their absence, in my life. One particular thread in this web is our deep-seated self-image around resources. It's not about numbers or calculations. It's about the story we tell ourselves about who we are in relation to abundance. I felt, at times, like a tightrope walker balancing between hope and dread. The more I leaned toward possibility, the more my subconscious flinched, as if the act of stepping forward threatened some fragile equilibrium I wasn't even aware I'd built. This internal conflict drained my motivation, even when external circumstances encouraged courage. There was a Sunday afternoon when I sat on my couch with a friend who shared a strikingly similar experience. She described how her hesitation to accept promotions stemmed not from lack of qualification, but from a quiet self-sabotage. We unraveled her history, noting how praise as a child was sometimes followed by subtle withdrawal, teaching her that success might alienate others or push her into impossible standards. In essence, her identity was bound to being good enough, but not too good, a boundary invisible but fiercely defended by her psyche. Hearing this, I realized I had guarded a similar line, limiting what I allowed myself to pursue financially because deep inside, I feared becoming someone unfamiliar to myself and those around me. More than just fear or avoidance, I noticed patterns of emotional reasoning shaping my actions. For instance, whenever good news arrived, whether a bonus, a new opportunity, or a surprise windfall, a rush of disbelief would flood my mind. This won't last, the instinct whispered. Yet sometimes, this anticipation of failure triggered behaviors that ensured the cycle continued. I'd impulsively spend, sidetrack savings, or bury my head in work to avoid facing the newfound resources. It was as if I unconsciously rehearsed disappointment, protecting myself from the dissonance of change by keeping things just as usual. There's another layer often overlooked: how social narratives about what we deserve, or don't, interact with our personal experiences. One evening over dinner, a family member remarked, "Why aim high? People like us don't get rich." The casual tone masked a powerful embedded judgment about identity and social class. I could feel the weight of unspoken rules settling like dust on my aspirations. This wasn't just about financial limits. It was about cultural inheritance, the subtle conditioning that restricts who we feel entitled to become. Examining that, I realized many of my doubts weren't born from personal failure, but from collective stories passed down through generations. Later that week, I met a woman named Elena who was transforming her financial habits in surprising ways. She spoke of experiencing moments where her emotional state directly influenced her financial choices, not through logic, but through what she termed energy blocks. For example, after a stressful argument, she noticed herself withdrawing from negotiations or avoiding calls related to contracts. Her body and emotions, intertwined with cognition, acted like a barometer, signaling readiness or resistance. Watching her, I grasped that this connection between feelings and actions is far more dynamic than I had imagined. It doesn't just exist quietly, but actively shifts the trajectory we follow. One night, while journaling, I traced how tiredness, frustration, or excitement had driven certain decisions in my past. I saw episodes where a simple mood swing had led me to impulsive purchases or, conversely, the freeze of indecision. Recognizing this subtle emotional undercurrent gave me clues to anticipate and interrupt these cycles rather than surrender to them unconsciously. I realized that mastering this emotional rhythm around finances requires more than willpower. It demands an intimate understanding of my own mental and bodily states. Now, consider how this applies when you face dilemmas like investing in your own potential or negotiating a raise. It's not enough to rely solely on rational analysis or advice from others. Instead, you need to engage with the deeper internal dialogues playing out, the fears and hopes interlaced with personal history. Until we become fluent in the language of our own emotional and cognitive landscapes, progress will feel halting, like traversing a maze without mapping the walls. For me, breaking through meant developing patience and courage to sit with discomfort. Instead of masking anxiety with distraction, I learned to notice it, how tightness in my chest or sudden silence signaled resistance. I gave myself permission to be vulnerable, admitting that the growth I wanted was accompanied by fear, not as a contradiction, but as an integral part of the journey. By acknowledging this, I softened the voice that demanded perfection and rejection of failure and opened space for experimentation. Through these reflections, I start to see that our financial behaviors are less about external facts than internal dialogues. By listening carefully to those conversations beneath the surface, without judgment, without urgency, we can catch the subtle currents shaping every decision. Like learning a musical instrument, it takes practice, awareness, and patience to harmonize old patterns with new intentions. Every moment, every hesitation, offers clues about what lies under the surface waiting to be understood and transformed. I recall an afternoon when I found myself hesitating at the checkout line, clutching a small item I had carefully selected, yet suddenly overwhelmed by an inexplicable unease. It wasn't about affordability. I had the funds. Instead, a silent voice whispered doubts. Is this extravagance? Will it tip the balance? The struggle wasn't with logic, but with instinct, as if an invisible hand was gently pulling me back from claiming something as simple as a purchase for myself. Moments like these revealed to me how deeply entrenched unseen narratives influence even our smallest decisions. A friend once shared a striking metaphor that changed how I viewed this internal conflict. She compared our financial mindsets to old tapes running in a cassette player, some with warping and static, looping the same distorted messages repeatedly. When new opportunities emerge, like a promotion or a chance to invest, our mental tape might skip or rewind automatically, stopping us mid-step. This analogy helped me grasp the nonverbal ways our beliefs crash the rhythm of progress, simply by replaying outdated fears. It painted a vivid picture of how internal audio glitches create resistance. I also began recognizing the role of emotional triggers linked to money. During a routine monthly review of my accounts, a sudden spike in expenses caused my chest to tighten tightly, as if under siege. Instead of stepping back and analyzing objectively, my body responded with a fight-or-flight impulse, leading to impulsive choices seeking quick relief, even if ultimately harmful. This physical reaction illuminated how financial stress translates into somatic responses, turning abstract numbers into real, felt discomfort that sabotages thoughtful planning. I realized emotional regulation must accompany fiscal strategy if change is to thrive. During this journey, I encountered stories of people whose financial behaviors resembled mine, but had transformed profoundly by listening to their bodies and emotions. For example, one woman recognized her habitual avoidance of bills stemmed from a childhood shadow. Her family had a history of sudden layoffs, creating chronic insecurity. By acknowledging this trauma, she moved beyond denial patterns, consciously scheduling bill payments paired with calming breathing exercises to reduce anxiety. This blend of psychological awareness and physical self-care sparked progress her previous attempts hadn't achieved. In my own life, I experimented with tuning into feelings accompanying different financial decisions. I noticed that opportunities promising growth often carried an undercurrent of discomfort, like the air before a storm. But instead of running from that uneasy pulse, I leaned in, embracing the tension as a signal of transformation rather than threat. It was like learning to dance with a storm, allowing energy that once felt dangerous to guide me into new rhythms of abundance. This shift redefined risk for me, not as a peril to avoid, but as a doorway demanding courage and presence. Another surprising insight involved my relationship with choice fatigue. Faced repeatedly with budgeting and spending dilemmas, I found decision overload drain my willpower, pushing me toward default patterns shaped in less aware moments. One evening after a long day, I mindlessly ordered takeout instead of cooking, though this wasn't a habit. It was exhaustion steering me toward instant gratification, a temporary balm masking deeper anxiety about money management. Recognizing this cycle inspired me to build small routines that conserve mental energy, like automating bills or creating preset spending limits, freeing capacity for mindful decisions. I also uncovered the shadowy influence of social comparison on my financial mindset. Watching friends' successes on social media sometimes filled me with admiration, yet paradoxically also sparked feelings of inadequacy and pressure. These emotions unsettled me, draining confidence in my own pace and choices. Understanding this taught me to distinguish inspiration from toxic comparison. Instead of measuring my worth by others' milestones, I began focusing on personal goals aligned with my values, nurturing a sense of agency untouched by external validation. One afternoon, as I reflected on an impulsive purchase I regretted, I realized that beneath the act was a moment of seeking relief from underlying feelings of unworthiness. It dawned on me that consumption had sometimes functioned as a temporary disguise to soothe internal discomfort, creating cycles of short-lived satisfaction followed by guilt. This awareness sparked a shift in how I approached all my financial exchanges. Rather than hiding from emotion, I invited honesty, asking myself what need lay beneath the urge to buy, and whether a different response could meet that need with greater kindness. Furthermore, I discovered that embracing vulnerability played a crucial role in healing financial habits. Sharing these internal battles with trusted friends and mentors dissolved shame's heavy grip. One conversation, in particular, with a colleague who admitted his own struggles with imposter syndrome around promotions, was a turning point. Their openness inspired me to confront my fears openly, transforming isolation into connection. This sense of shared humanity became fuel for resilience and reauthoring my financial narrative. When I now step into challenging financial situations, a negotiation, investment, or budget reset, I carry these lessons. Emotions are messengers. Exhaustion can cloud clarity. External narratives don't define my personal path, and vulnerability invites transformation. This holistic awareness empowers me not only to understand why certain choices arise, but invites me to rewrite responses with intention and compassion for myself. Now, imagine yourself navigating your own financial landscape with this depth of insight. What would it feel like to acknowledge those hidden impulses calmly, to treat your emotional signals as guides instead of obstacles? Could this new perspective shift how you act when faced with uncertainty, temptation, or opportunity? In exploring these questions, we uncover the rich inner terrain shaping our financial journey, one deeply alive with possibility waiting to be embraced. One afternoon, I found myself staring at a stack of unopened bills, overwhelmed not by their quantity, but by an unexpected paralysis seizing my mind. While the watchdog of logic urged me to tackle them head-on, a different voice, a quiet, insistent one, pressed me into avoidance. I realized this wasn't simple procrastination. It was a protective hesitation rooted in deeper vulnerability. The tension felt like walking a tightrope frayed by invisible winds, each step charged with uncertainty and a looming sense of inadequacy. I understood this internal conflict wasn't isolated, but part of a complex psychological landscape governing how I interacted with money on a visceral level. Simultaneously, I noticed how frequently shame appeared as a silent passenger in my financial journey. It didn't always manifest loudly, but carried a heavy, invisible weight, particularly during moments of financial missteps or acknowledging struggles to those close to me. Once, after revealing a setback to a trusted friend, I caught myself instinctively lowering my voice, bracing for judgment, even though none came. This guarded reaction spoke volumes about conditioning that finances are a hidden fault line in my identity. The taboo around revealing financial vulnerability had erected walls, isolating me from seeking support or speaking openly, even though connection could have sparked understanding and relief. My awareness expanded further when I encountered the concept of emotional budgeting. At first, I thought budgeting was solely a tool of numbers and spreadsheets. But emotional budgeting involves gauging how feelings influence where energy and attention flow in financial decisions. For example, after a tough day, I caught myself indulging in impulsive spending not out of poor judgment, but as an unconscious reward mechanism soothing depleted emotional reserves. Recognizing this pattern reshaped my relationship with spending into a dialogue, listening to what emotions urged instead of silencing or suppressing them. I began experimenting with alternative forms of self-care that didn't rely on financial outlays, such as walks or mindful breathing, helping mitigate the emotional exhaustion driving counterproductive choices. In a radically different experience, I encountered a surprising sense of empowerment while learning to celebrate small financial victories. It wasn't just about acknowledging milestones, but savoring the feelings that came with progress, even incremental ones, like the quiet pride blooming after paying down a tricky debt or resisting a habitual impulse buy. This act of honoring tiny wins rewired how I perceived success and scarcity. It cultivated an emotional reservoir from which motivation could spring, easing the heaviness of past doubts and fueling a more compassionate, generous internal monologue. The practice became a gentle revolution, transforming the energy I carried toward money from tension into warmth and possibility. Conversely, I also unearthed the significant impact of my relationship to control in financial circumstances. In moments when unexpected expenses arose, I felt my equilibrium shatter, propelled by a sensation of chaos invading what I believed should be stable and manageable. This jump from calm to turmoil was not solely about logistics, but an emotional storyline entwined with autonomy and trust. I came to see that surrendering illusory control and replacing it with flexible confidence required a profound emotional recalibration. This process resembled learning to navigate shifting currents in a river rather than attempting to dam every fluctuation, emphasizing resilience over rigid command. One particular situation crystallized this lesson. I had set aside savings meticulously for months, anticipating a specific goal. Suddenly, a medical emergency demanded much of what I had accumulated. Initially, anger and disappointment engulfed me as my plans unraveled. Yet, through reflection, I discovered space for acceptance and even gratitude, for a body healing, for resources available despite hardship, and for the inner strength emerging in crisis. This shift in perspective softened my response to uncertainty, teaching me that emotional responses tied to financial disruption can be reshaped to support adaptability and hope. Similarly, my conversations with others revealed how differing attachment styles influence financial behaviors. A friend described how her anxious attachment made her oscillate between hoarding money as a security blanket and reckless spending triggered by emotional distress. Understanding that these patterns extend beyond money to broader relationship dynamics opened new avenues for empathy and self-awareness. It became clear that healing in the financial realm intertwined with emotional mastery cultivated in all relationships, underscoring how deeply intertwined money psychology and personal narratives truly are. In the quiet moments when I allowed myself to ponder the meaning I assigned to wealth, I uncovered a paradox. There was deep desire entwined with hesitation, curiosity mixed with fear, like standing at the edge of a vast ocean, drawn in by light, yet wary of the unknown depths. I realized that wealth was not merely an accumulation of currency, but a mirror reflecting how much I valued myself, my dreams, and my capacity to receive life's abundance. This insight reframed my journey. Financial growth became a pathway into richer self-connection and belief, inviting me to honor my whole being rather than fragmenting success into mere numbers. By confronting these emotional layers, I began to understand the intricate dance within me between longing for security and craving freedom, between embracing I am enough and resisting vulnerability. Each tension is an invitation, a whisper guiding me toward deeper self-knowledge and courage. Navigating this internal terrain feels much like exploring an ancient forest, sometimes daunting, yet rich with hidden treasures waiting to be discovered through patience, presence, and self-compassion. It struck me one evening as I sat alone in a dimly lit room, the only sound being the rhythmic ticking of an old clock. My thoughts were restless, swirling around a decision I'd been avoiding for weeks, a chance to pivot my career that promised greater income, but also demanded immense vulnerability and risk. My heart raced, not from excitement, but from a well of unease I couldn't quite name. Pushing aside the spreadsheets and plans, I suddenly realized the true barrier wasn't external logistics, but a silent, powerful narrative whispering that stepping into abundance might unravel my identity. I felt like a tightrope walker, gripping the balancing pole tightly, while an invisible wind pushed against my every move. In that moment, I recognized the compound effect of past emotional experiences shaping my response to opportunity. It wasn't just fear. It was a layered tapestry of protective instincts, cultural imprints, and personal stories. I thought about a childhood memory when I took an ill-fated risk to please my family, only to be met with criticism disguised as concern. That pattern replayed, unconsciously steering me toward caution masquerading as wisdom. The tension between craving growth and guarding myself created a restless, whispering dialogue inside, one that praised safety even while longing for change. My mind became a battlefield where hope clashed with old loyalties. On a different occasion, I met Lydia, whose journey illuminated another dimension of these complexities. She spoke candidly about how financial stress tangled with her sense of connection to those she loved. For her, money wasn't an isolated issue. It was a symbolic currency exchanged in relationships, weighted with unspoken expectations and histories. When family disagreements arose around financial topics, silence often hung heavy, carrying more hurt than words could express. Lydia taught me that money can act like a secret language, encoding years of trust, disappointment, and longing, all influencing choices in nuanced emotional ways. Understanding that, she embraced therapy not just to manage budgets, but to heal relational wounds reflected in her spending habits. That conversation resonated deeply as I recalled times when my decisions were less about numbers and more about seeking emotional equilibrium. Once, after a particularly tough season emotionally, I impulsively bought an expensive ticket for a weekend trip. It surprised me. I hadn't planned to spend so much. Yet, the act felt like a desperate grasp for respite, a way to purchase space from my own anxiety. It became clear that impulsivity is sometimes less reckless than it appears. Rather, it's a signal that something essential, unmet internally, is clamoring for attention. Recognizing these emotional currents offered me new tools to slow down, inviting curiosity about what I truly needed instead of acting on autopilot. The dance between autonomy and security emerged as a powerful theme as well. I recalled how control over money often mirrored control over life's uncertainties. For years, I built intricate financial plans like a fortress, each fondly imagined scenario meticulously prepared for. Yet, life's unpredictability shattered some of those constructs, leaving me adrift. At first, it felt like failure. Eventually, I learned that flexibility, openness, and grace in response to flux aren't weaknesses but profound strengths. Embracing impermanence allowed me to loosen rigid grips and invite creativity, even joy, in managing resources. This shift recalibrated how I related to abundance. Not something conquered, but something flowing and alive, inviting participation rather than domination. Later, a quiet Saturday afternoon brought unexpected clarity. I sat with a notebook, jotting down thoughts during a mindfulness exercise. Instead of focusing on goals or worries, I traced memories tied to money feeling safe or dangerous. Vivid images surfaced. A warm kitchen where my grandmother used to count small bills with tender care, contrasting junior high classrooms where scarcity bred exclusion and shame. These snapshots weren't merely nostalgia. They revealed how emotional memories shaped my intuitive sense of worthiness and possibility around finances. I began to feel those memories as living moments inside me, carrying both caution and tenderness. A transformative realization took root. Acknowledging the richness of this emotional landscape could become the foundation of renewed courage. Conversely, I witnessed how ignoring these subtle emotional threads backfires. I recall a friend, Marcus, who relentlessly chased promotions, bonuses, and investments, all while avoiding conversations about his anxieties around money. His ambition dazzled but masked exhaustion and recurring anxiety attacks. When he finally stepped into therapy, he understood his relentless pursuit was fueled by a deep fear of scarcity shaped by early family instability. This awareness didn't diminish his drive. Instead, it tempered it with compassion and patience. Over time, Marcus learned to set boundaries aligned with emotional well-being, revealing a quieter, steadier approach to growth. His story underscored that emotional wisdom enhances, not impedes, the journey toward financial empowerment. Now, consider how emotional complexity actively sways moments when you weigh options or wrestle with doubts. When opportunity knocks hard, yet uncertainty lingers like an uninvited guest, what inner voices rise to greet it? Are they echoes of past protections or new expressions of aspiration? Navigating such crossroads demands a delicate blend of self-honesty and kindness, a willingness to recognize fear without becoming captive to it. We don't need to banish those feelings. Instead, inviting them into dialogue can reveal hidden motivations and unlock pathways previously obscured by silence. Each choice becomes not simply a calculation, but a story of resilience and transformation unfolding in real time. Through embracing emotional insight, financial choices transform from mere transactions into acts of alignment with identity, values, and healing. The path forward is not a linear march, but a fluid conversation, sometimes hesitant, often brave, always evolving. As I walk it, I'm learning that the profound shifts I seek begin with inviting all parts of myself, cautious, hopeful, wounded, brave, into one shared narrative. Only then can abundance step from the shadows and settle comfortably within reach. A few months back, I met Aaron during a workshop. He was a graphic designer with a track record of consistent work, yet every year, he seemed to reset his savings to zero. He told me about an almost magnetic pull towards spending as soon as money landed in his account, a cycle he described as both thrilling and crushing. What stood out to me was how Aaron's pattern wasn't born from frivolity. It stemmed from an unanswered emotional hunger he hadn't fully acknowledged. He equated spending with reclaiming lost joy, a brief escape from the numbness accumulating from months of relentless self-expectation and perceived stagnation. Witnessing his story nudged me to explore how our emotional state can hijack expression through money, twisting acts of earning or saving into complex, almost poetic acts of emotional survival. Diving deeper, I began paying attention to the stories I told myself before I made financial decisions. I noticed a recurring theme. I resisted intentional choices when I sensed they would detach me from what felt familiar, even if that familiarity carried discomfort. For instance, taking a leap like investing in my own skills summoned a quiet tension between excitement and an unnameable dread, as if stepping away from the safety of the known path robbed me of belonging. It wasn't logical resistance. It was as though an unspoken contract with my past weighed heavily in the present, coloring my willingness to change. This revelation helped me see that financial behavior isn't a one-dimensional action, but a layered dialogue with identity and belonging that unfolds beyond conscious awareness. Once, when I stumbled upon an article about embodied cognition, a field illustrating how our bodily experiences anchor our thought patterns, I realized money-related emotions might be more literally lodged in our physical presence than I had imagined. For example, I observed how tightness across my shoulders coincided with discussions about numbers and budgets, an unconscious embodiment of tension and guardedness. It was as if the weight of financial stress translated into muscular stiffness, anchoring emotional turmoil physically. This insight sparked a novel approach. I began incorporating gentle movement and breath work before financial planning sessions, which ironically loosened not only my body, but my mental grip on scarcity-based anxieties. This practice became a gateway toward integrating mind and body in the often cerebral experience of money handling. Another layer unfolded when I reflected on language patterns that surfaced under stress. During moments when scarcity thoughts surged, my internal dialogue shifted into survival mode, adopting phrases like, "I can't afford to lose this," or "I have to hold on to every penny." One afternoon, while journaling, I intentionally shifted the narrative to a more compassionate tone. "I have enough to nurture what matters," or "I create resources in unexpected ways." The emotional relief that came afterward surprised me. It wasn't a mere exercise in positive thinking. It was a subtle reconditioning of the neural pathways that shape emotional responses connected to value and scarcity. This linguistic reframing taught me that the words we whisper to ourselves in vulnerable moments form a kind of emotional architecture influencing decisions far beyond conscious control. I find it crucial to mention the role of ritual and symbolism in transforming habits. For example, I developed a practice of lighting a candle and sitting in quiet before reviewing my finances. The simple act framed the activity as one of respect and mindfulness, shifting from a dreaded chore to a moment of presence and intention. One evening, as the flickering flame danced, I noticed my chest unclenching and clarity arrived amid the stillness. This small ritual became a profound invitation for emotional openness, dismantling tension accumulated from years of disconnection. It highlighted for me how embedding meaning into routine financial moments can catalyze a richer relationship with ourselves and our resources. Then, there's the complicated dance with expectations, not just personal, but also projected by social circles, families, or cultural contexts. A close friend once confessed that her reluctance to ask for a raise stemmed from an ingrained belief that ambition clashed with femininity in her community. She wrestled silently with self-judgment and fear of alienation, caught between desires for advancement and staying true to collective norms. Observing her struggle illuminated how identity conflicts subtly govern financial choices, often masquerading as practical concerns. It challenged me to question how deep and varied these intersections can be, shaping limits that aren't simply financial, but existential. A turning point for me was when I began to embrace discomfort seated in ambivalence. For years, I sought definitive answers. Should I save more, invest now, or delay? But increasingly, I realized clarity often unfolds amid uncertainty, not in its absence. An evening spent simply noticing the discomfort without urgency revealed a new way to inhabit those moments, as fertile grounds for transformation instead of obstacles. This shift required patience and a willingness to tolerate not knowing, which paradoxically created openings for intuitive insight and more aligned action. Finally, I want to share an experience involving generosity. After grappling with personal scarcity, I joined a local collaborative focused on pooling resources and sharing knowledge. The experience unveiled how giving, not in excess but in intentional, heartfelt ways, filtered back as an unexpected source of abundance. I saw how acts of sharing transcended material exchange and touched the realm of connection and trust, replenishing emotional reserves and decreasing isolation. This perspective reframed prosperity from a solitary accumulation into a collective dance of flow and reciprocity that nurtures not only bank accounts but spirits. I remember the moment when I first realized how deeply my inner stories had woven themselves into my daily financial actions, not in grand decisions, but through tiny, nearly invisible habits. It happened one morning as I brewed coffee, absent-mindedly counting the creamer packets I was allowed before feeling guilty. The ritual was automatic, yet charged with silent judgment. I felt trapped within unspoken rules that dictated what I could enjoy without shame. Suddenly, it hit me. These subtle rituals were like guards, silently enforcing boundaries constructed by old fears and assumptions. Recognizing these unnoticed emotional checkpoints felt like uncovering a hidden ecosystem influencing my money moves far more than any spreadsheet ever could. My own history turned into a patchwork of episodes where emotions colored seemingly routine choices. I recall buying a simple item online, something I'd wanted for months, and the drowning wave of anxiety that followed the click. My chest tightened, An internal voice whispered warnings about irresponsibility. This wasn't just budget anxiety. It was a dialogue with accumulated doubt about self-worth, perseverance, and deservingness. It dawned on me that emotional memories serve as pulses that either energize or sabotage behaviors, not through conscious willpower, but through a complex undercurrent of feelings tied to identity. In that instant, I understood the battlefield wasn't just external, but profoundly intimate. One afternoon shifted my entire approach when a close friend confided in me about her experience with emotional triggers linked to money. She described how certain dates, birthdays, anniversaries, evoked a combination of hope, pressure, and sometimes grief, significantly influencing her spending. These moments acted as emotional magnets, pulling her into patterns of generosity aimed at seeking validation or repairing unseen wounds. Witnessing her vulnerability illuminated how financial choices often carry symbolic meanings that transcend the transactional. It became clear that recognizing these emotional pull points could unlock empathy toward oneself and open doors to conscious decision-making imbued with compassion. Further into this exploration, I discovered how mood states influence the delicate tension between will and impulse. After an exhausting week, I found myself reaching for my credit card with the casualness of autopilot, seeking relief through small indulgences that delivered ephemeral comfort. In hindsight, these spending sprees weren't about the price tags. They were acts of self-soothing during emotional droughts. If I had acknowledged the fatigue's presence beforehand, I might have chosen rest over retail therapy. This insight revealed how vulnerability can masquerade as impulsiveness and called me to cultivate preemptive kindness, attending to emotional needs proactively to reduce harmful lapses. Delving deeper, I witnessed how social environments act as subtle mirrors, reflecting and reinforcing monetary narratives. In one gathering, a peer joked about outspending their paycheck with a sort of resigned humor. Listening carefully, I sensed a collective weariness entwined with unspoken hope. It dawned on me that shared cultural attitudes toward money, often laden with scarcity rhetoric, create invisible frameworks shaping individual mindsets. This phenomenon resembles an echo chamber where limiting beliefs reverberate unless consciously disrupted. By becoming aware of these external currents, I began to discern where my own story ended and societal conditioning intruded, enabling a clearer path toward self-authorship. I also realized the power embedded in reclaiming language about money. Instead of using terms loaded with moral judgment, like good or bad spending, I started reframing dialogue with myself to objective observations. This expenditure is aligned with my values, or this choice supports my long-term goals. This subtle shift in internal conversation created space for curiosity and grace, dismantling the binary thinking that had hardened financial emotions into guilt or shame. It reminded me that words wield enormous creative power, sculpting the emotional contour of decision-making and, ultimately, behavior. Later, in therapy, I explored deeper emotional roots that had married money with safety in my psyche. Childhood experiences where financial instability paired with unpredictability around attachment figures imprinted a choreography of mistrust and hypervigilance. I recognized certain habits of micromanaging every dollar stemmed less from practicality and more from unconscious attempts to orchestrate a sense of security the world hadn't consistently offered. This realization reframed those behaviors as adaptive survival strategies rather than personal failings, opening doors to healing with self-compassion and understanding. While trying to rewrite old patterns, I began embracing discomfort as a teacher. I noticed sensations of tightness or restlessness arising when facing growth opportunities, which historically triggered retreat. Instead of fleeing these feelings, I started to approach them patiently, as signals guiding me to explore vulnerabilities rather than warnings to avoid risk entirely. This orientation allowed me to stay present when fear rose, gradually loosening its grip and inviting a more expansive sense of possibility. It paralleled stepping into a shadowy forest with a lantern, illuminating unknown corners instead of sprinting back toward well-worn paths. Now, consider the ways your own mood, environment, language, and bodily sensations weave together in moments when you make financial decisions. What subtle messengers might be nudging your actions without your immediate notice? By engaging these signals with gentle inquiry, you can begin to untangle emotional knots and allow new patterns to emerge, ones that honor not only practical aims, but your holistic well-being as well. Reflecting on this journey, I sense we are standing at the edge of a quiet revelation, a space where the threads we've navigated begin to interlace into a living tapestry. It's as if we've been wandering through a dimly lit forest, each step unveiling textures, shadows, and hints of light that subtly shift our understanding of the terrain beneath our feet. The air hums with an undercurrent of something profound, an unfolding beneath the surface that beckons deeper exploration. Here, the boundaries between emotion and rationale blur, inviting us to tune into a frequency where the inner landscape speaks in patterns, symbols, and rhythms beyond mere words. In this unfolding, I notice how the inner dialogues we carry shape not only our decisions, but also the very architecture of our experience. How we perceive possibility, safety, and belonging through prisms uniquely our own, yet strangely universal. It's compelling to realize how intricately woven these invisible scripts have become, like a symphony playing softly in the background of our lives, sometimes harmonious, often discordant, yet always influencing the tempo at which we move. Our minds and hearts orchestrate a delicate dance between protection and growth, familiar comfort and latent yearning, casting shadows that both conceal and reveal our deepest longings. I feel a sense of invitation rising within me, the kind that does not ask for immediate answers, but calls for courageous presence. It asks us to acknowledge the silent patterns shaping our relationship with abundance, to honor the complexity of our fears alongside the resilience that has brought us this far. The energy here is paradoxical, fragile and fierce all at once, a threshold where old defenses begin to loosen, allowing space for something unseen to seep through. The challenge is to resist the temptation to rush toward conclusions, and instead, cultivate a gentle curiosity that lingers, listens, and waits. As I walk this path, I find myself wrestling with a quiet tension between the impulse to control and the impulse to surrender. Each financial crossroads no longer exists as a mere external event, but pulses with emotional undertones that color how I perceive risk, reward, and worth. The familiar comfort of certainty is shadowed by the allure of transformation, stirring an internal dialogue that feels simultaneously demanding and compassionate, stern and tender. It is within this tension that life's alchemy begins, coaxing us to evolve beyond scripted limitations into freer, richer ways of being. In conversations both with myself and others, I witness the emergence of a shared human narrative, one that acknowledges struggle without shame and embraces imperfection as fertile ground for growth. The complexity of our experiences reminds me that progress is rarely a straight line, but more like waves responding to unseen tides, sometimes retreating, sometimes surging forward. Each emotional undercurrent and cognitive echo informs the next movement, inviting a rhythm that is intuitive rather than prescriptive. This fluidity fosters an environment where healing and empowerment do not contradict, but rather nourish each other. I sense that within this ever-shifting dance resides a certain tenderness, a space where even the weightiest blocks can unravel gently, and where the balance of inner authority and vulnerability shapes not just our financial realities, but the quality of our inner lives. To me, this evokes a garden tended with patience, where seeds of new thought and feeling take root quietly before bursting into bloom. It requires trusting natural cycles of growth and decay, and honoring the unseen labor beneath the earth's surface that sustains visible flourishing. At times, this journey feels like traversing a hidden passage no map can fully chart, requiring faith in our capacity to navigate uncertainty and welcome transformation. The terrain is often unfamiliar and unpredictable, yet it also bears the promise of liberation, the possibility that, by turning inward and embracing our multifaceted humanity, we unlock doors framed by hope and renewed purpose. What we once saw as barriers dissolve into doorways, guiding us toward an unfolding story richer and more expansive than any single chapter. As I immerse myself in this process, the lines separating self-limitation and potential blur into a continuum where healing is both deeply personal and universally resonant. There is an awakening here, subtle yet powerful, like dawn diffusing light into hidden corners, revealing unexpected beauty and clarity. This awakening doesn't rush to define itself. Instead, it offers a quiet assurance that growth can take root in the fertile spaces between thought, feeling, and choice, where inner freedom begins to blossom. As I sit here reflecting on the journey that has unfolded through these words and thoughts, I feel the weight and the lightness of a truth that is both uncomfortable and liberating. It wasn't an easy path to walk, facing the quiet currents that have long steered my actions and emotions around money. Yet, in that struggle, there was a subtle, almost secret invitation to know myself more fully, to trace the invisible threads that bind fear, hope, and identity into the fabric of my choices. I realize now that money is more than currency. It is a mirror reflecting the intricate landscape of my inner world. And only when I begin to tend to that inner terrain with care and gentleness can I hope to see shifts ripple outward into tangible growth. There was a moment, years ago, when I caught a glimpse of this shift. I had earned a modest bonus, a surprise that might have sparked excitement or celebration. Instead, a whisper of unease nested deep in my chest, urging caution. Sitting in that quiet discomfort, I caught the traces of stories passed down, unspoken fears coded as wisdom, and suddenly the familiar impulses to protect, to shrink, no longer felt like my own. In place of a swift reaction, I chose stillness, letting the tension unravel slowly, guarded curiosity replacing the sharpness of self-judgment. It was a revelation, the possibility of finding safety not in resistance, but in gentle engagement with my fears. I imagine now how many of us carry such silent dialogues. We wear armor crafted from old beliefs. Money is scarce, wealth belongs elsewhere, success is reserved for others. These ideas nest in shadowed corners, quietly influencing the spaces where our decisions bloom or falter. But what if the key to transformation lies not in chasing numbers or external formulas, but in listening, truly listening, to those inner voices, exploring what stories they tell and why they arose? What if embracing that inner complexity, as paradoxical as it may seem, becomes the very act that frees us from repetitive cycles? In those conversations with myself, I've encountered tenderness alongside struggle. I've felt regret slip into understanding, fear soften into cautious hope. And it is this dance, the simultaneous holding of vulnerability and strength, that creates room for profound change. Healing begins not with eradication of bad habits, but through awakening to deeper truths about self and experience. I see now how the mind, the heart, and the body converse in a language of subtle cues, guiding us gently in moments when awareness dawns. The moments when we don't leap away from discomfort, but lean into it, asking, "What do you have to teach me?" Sometimes transformation feels like turning a huge, locked door. The lock is complex, made from years of invisible craftsmanship. But inside, there is light, warmth, freedom to move differently. None of this is linear. The path twists with revelations, setbacks, and quiet breakthroughs. What matters most isn't how fast we walk, but the willingness to keep stepping, even when the terrain is unfamiliar or demanding. And it's vital to remember we don't walk alone. Invisible companions, past selves, hopes, fears, the collective patterns of those before us, join this dance. Recognizing their presence invites compassion, not blame. So, I invite you to notice what stories hum quietly in your own mind when you think about abundance and scarcity. What whispers rise when opportunities beckon? What shadows flicker when choices demand courage? Perhaps within those responses lie seeds waiting to sprout new patterns of trust, generosity, and curiosity. There is an aliveness there, an untamed, beautiful possibility that calls not for perfection but for genuine presence. As I move forward, I carry a new rhythm in my chest, a pulse of patience woven with courage. I understand now that the work is continual, an ongoing dialogue with the full range of my emotions and beliefs. Each day offers a chance to rewrite a small part of the script to one that supports growth grounded in kindness and self-respect. I notice that when I treat my inner world as a sacred landscape rather than a battleground, the outer world begins to shift in subtle and meaningful ways. In closing, I want to honor the hero in you I see mirrored in this story, the quiet resilience, the tireless striving, the tender wounds beneath the armor. Know that the invisible battle you wage is also the doorway to freedom. Inside that struggle lives the possibility to unlock new doors, to step into spaces where abundance isn't distant or conditional, but woven deeply into the way you know and love yourself. It is a courageous act, an ongoing journey, and a profound gift. Trust in your capacity to listen, to heal, and to create a life filled with both flourishing and grace.